Hey guys, this is Jarek here. This is basically a walkthrough video of my current Anointed Champion Righteous build, which we go through the ability scores, the feats, the boons, the mounts, the companions, the insignias for those mounts, and so on. I won't be going through the power tree, however, because that will take too long to go through that in this particular video, so I'll most likely do the power tree in a completely different video. Alright, let's get started here with abilities. As you guys know, nothing much changed there. I usually go for wisdom and strength because 1 charisma, as you guys know, equals to 1% recharge speed, which ultimately is 200 recovery, while 1 strength equals 1% crit chance, and 1% crit chance equals to 400 of your critical strike stat. Basically, you get better bang for your buck going for wisdom and strength. If you choose charisma, in my opinion, it's a waste, because for multiple reasons. For starters, you can easily get back 200 recovery through various means: your artifacts, the actual gear you have, your companion, your mount abilities, your boons, and so on. So guys, I do believe it's a waste putting into charisma, whereas at least if you put into strength, you give yourself a nice little boost to your crit chance, and ultimately that could help you out in terms of heals, depending if you do pick crit severity pets. Alright, so moving on now. Feats. Nothing much changed there as well, but I would like to note here that in terms of these two moves, healing action and domain synergy, if you lack recovery or you're trying to build up more recovery, I recommend that you put 3 out of 5 into domain synergy. If you, however, don't need this, just simply put your 3 out of 5 into healing action. Right, we move on to weapon mastery, of course. Purpose soul, yeah. 4 out of 5 into bountiful fortune, and 1 out of 3 in cleanse. Well, as you guys know, cleanse has been useful nowadays thanks to that first Spambreaker Island boss called Haiti or Hattie. This boss releases a wickedly deadly poison, and cleanse helps a whole lot to get rid of that poison. I'll move on to the Paragon. So guys, as you can see on my guide on MMO Mines, I usually have different variations of my own build. I currently use the variation with Gift of Haste, so basically that would be 27 points into Righteous and 14 into Virtuous, which should go like this. I do want to point out here with Furious Intervention, I used to think back in the day that this move only worked when I actually, as it said, deal more damage, but most of you should know by now that actually adds to your action point gain percentage. Like, take note here of my action point gain right now at 45.1%. When I max this out and commit to changes, as you guys see, it actually added on 10%. Maybe a little more because it was 45.1 just now and it went up to 55.3, but you guys got the picture here. Right. This move now, Ancient Warden, as most people know by now, Ancient Warden does not work, right? So in that instance, if you want to put your points into somewhere else, I recommend Astral Fury at this point in time, or maybe Righteous Suffering, either or, but I prefer Astral Fury more. For me, however, it doesn't matter to me, so I just put the points in here anyway, knowing that it still doesn't work. But as I said, that's just me. You guys have a choice between Astral Fury and Righteous Suffering. Weapons of Light, well, as you know, this is part of your power share, so of course you must max this out. No ifs, buts, or maybes. Next we have Bear Your Sins. This works as intended nowadays, so of course you max this out. Condemning Gaze, of course, max this out as well. Avatar Divine, the Capstone, of course, and 1 out of 5 for fire of the gods. Right, virtuous now. I basically go for starters with lasting wishes because, you know, to get that healer's aspect of it so I could put out stronger heals. Battle fervor. Of course, as anointed champion, you use blessing of battle as one of your 2 at wills, especially due to the reason of battle fervor where you can power share with this as well. So this is a no-brainer. You have to max this out as anointed champion. And lastly, gift of haste. You will put your 4 remaining points into this. Commit. Right. Before I move on, I just wanted to explain with Fire of the Gods. Of course, guys, we must at least have the 1 point into this so we can help proc stuff like Bear Your Sins. I know for Divine Oracle, Brand of the Sun really helps a lot with that, so I'm not sure even if for Divine Oracle people do indeed take points into Fire of the Gods. But for Anointed Champion, you should at least have 1 point here, no matter what variation you choose. Next up, our boons. Well, PvP doesn't really matter for this particular build as this build is a PvE aspect, but back when I used to PvP as Anointed Champion Faithful, I would usually go with Living Wall, Inspiring Defense, and Versatile Warrior. Sharender. Well, people, this way it gets slightly, you know, interesting and to properly explain stuff. So first to begin with here, this is a no-brainer. You go for power. This is where I wanted to explain. Well, I have had multiple debates with people about choosing deflect over crit here, and I'll explain why. Usually I choose crit to, you know, help me with my crit strike stat, as I try to have some sort of crit along with crit severity to help me be you know, an efficient healer along with being an excellent debuffer. But the reason why the deflect has a part to say in this is, as you will see later on, as you all know about the mount ability by now called Assassin's Covenant, where it takes away some of your deflect, your defense, and your lifesteal to add on to your power, which of course it will help in terms of your power sharing. This does not make a huge difference to me not choosing this boon, because I did indeed checked out both options on 2 different test server characters, and it didn't indeed give me that much more power, so it wouldn't hurt me in that sense. But guys, I just want to be clear here. If you're looking to stack on more power, you go for deflect. If you feel you don't need this, you go for crit strike. I'll choose deflect for now, just to show you guys who are watching this video, to give you all that friendly reminder to, you know, if you need to stack power. Next up here, I go with Elven Haste. Usually for this, Elven Tranquility, and lastly, I go with Elvish Fury. However, for some of you guys, if you don't need Elvish Fury, I recommend Elven Resolve for that stamina regen. So this is your choice really. I'll choose Elvish Fury for now. Dread Ring. No brainer here, we go for power. We go for lifesteal. This one is basically, if you need to be more defensive, you go for deflect. If you need to be a little more offensive, you go for resistance ignore. Either or really. Next, both of these boons are, you know, particularly bad, but I go for Enraged Regrowth. And lastly here, I go for Endless Consumption, because later on you'll see in the guide that from the Tyranny boons I use lifesteal, and you guys should know by now that as clerics, as healers, we do have some weak self-heal, so lifesteal does help us a little bit. It's not totally trash or totally to disregard as some people say, but the reason why I love this boon is, at least when we lifesteal, we at least will have stronger lifesteal abilities thanks to this particular boon. Next up, Icewind Dale. Well, for here I usually go for AoE resist. This one is dependent on what you need more incoming healing bonus or more stamina gain. It's your call here. This one, no brainer recovery. This one I usually go for cool resolve. And lastly here, all the boons here are pretty terrible. I usually go for Winter's Bounty. Or if you guys feel a little more offensive, you could go for Rousing Warmth. But honestly, all of these boons in this last section are terrible, so it doesn't matter. Alright, we are on Underdark. Of course, we start off here with power. This one is the same explanation as Sharandar. It's either you go for that crit strike to get that more healer's feel, if you have those crit severity companions, or if you're looking to stack more power due to power sharing, you go for this one with lifesteal. This boon, I've been told by fellow officer and guildmate Ayasuke that this boon is actually pretty damn terrible. So for that reason, we'll go for meditation. I know regen is not the greatest stat in the world, but apparently it beats having this one, for us anyway. This one, you'll go for stamina, and lastly, doesn't matter. You could go for tenacity for less defense against demons, or you go for strikes for more damage. Anyone. Next up, we have the Tyranny of Dragons. Of course, no brainer power. This one, the same explanation as Underdark and Sharandar. If you need more crit, you go for that due to, you know, reasons. As I said, like to be a better healer if you have the crit severity pets, and you know, just that little more oomph of damage. Or you go for Dragon Shadow to stack up on that power share. If you use, I should be clear here, if you're using Assassin's Covenant, then you definitely take these type of boons to stack on more power. This actually is the same thing. Either you need more arm pen for more damage, or you choose defense here to stack on that power from Assassin's Covenant. It doesn't matter to me, really. So I'll just choose this for now. Lifesteal, of course. And lastly, if you have 3 more points to spare here for this last section, you basically put 1 into Dragon's Fury for crit severity and 2 into Dragon's Thirst for more lifesteal. Next up, Guild Stronghold boons. Well, this is totally dependent on what type of guild you're in. If you're in an excellent guild, you benefit a lot from the boons. I would recommend to you guys, for offense, you choose power, of course. Defense, you go for defense, unless if you're having a tough time surviving, you go for the hit points boon. But most of the times I stick around with defense, and as well, the defense or even the lifesteal boon helps a lot with the whole Assassin's Covenant, with, you know, stacking on power to share. So that's why I usually go with defense nowadays. Utility, simple. If you are not in a dungeon, you go with Mount Speed. If you are in a dungeon, depending on the difficulty of the dungeon, you go with Revive Sickness. Next up, the Maze Engine. Basically here, lifesteal severity or incoming heal bonus, another one that doesn't really matter. This would help make your lifesteal stronger, so you could go with this. This one I usually go with the combat advantage because I'm not a fan of this boon. This one, this is your call here. You could go for more action point gain or more generation of stamina. And last but not least, I usually stick with Engine's Inspiration. For that, what it says there, your healing spells have a chance to heal allies around you for 20,000 hit points. But sometimes, I don't know if it's due to buffs and whatnot, I usually see a 30,000 number, not 20,000, and sometimes I see a random flat 60,000 number. So I'm not sure if this 20,000 is actually right. It could actually be more. Elemental Evil. You start off with power, uh, lifesteal, well, lifesteal severity. This one, if you're needing more recovery, I recommend you go with more recovery. And lastly, you could go with Wall of Wind here for more recovery as well. If you, however, don't want to take these two, Wall of Wind and Blazing Resilience, you just simply switch to Aggression and Retribution. So it's your call here, really. Storm King's Thunder. These boons, all of them are particularly, not that good. So you guys, your call here. You could go for this. The second one, your call here again. This one, I usually go for Chill Determination. This one, I go for Glacial Strength, 3 HP. Yeah. And lastly, all these boons here are terrible, super terrible, but I usually go with Healing Warm. Alright, new campaign. I actually have this unlocked on multiple tunes on the same test server account, but not on this one. This one was just the one I recently copied, maybe like some hours ago. What I wanted to say here on a side note is I went through the boons and other tunes, and I must point out that when we unlock this campaign, if it's looking down here, you would probably go for Aura of Hope. One moment. Sorry about that, that was a phone call. But anyway, Aura of Hope. This looks like an excellent choice for us in terms of the type of DC we are. Also, between these two, Healing Heat and Frenzy, we could go with Healing Heat, I guess. So far that's Aura of Hope, Healing Heat, and lastly, of course, we're going for this one. When I saw this boon, I loved the choice here. This was definitely an excellent boon they added here, because hey, that's free recovery and free hit points. You can't get better than that. As for the ones up here I was watching, not a fan of these, but I recommend either Vision of Beyond or Planar Vitality. One of these two. Alright, moving on to my companions. This is currently the 5 companions I use the most, starting with my summoned. As you guys know, I basically use the Cell Sword. As you guys know, the Cell Sword gives a 10% debuff, and this to me is pretty excellent. In terms of other companions I've mentioned in the past, like the Ambush Drake and the Dancing Shield, I actually got to test those and I really wasn't too pleased with it, especially that how nowadays they fixed the Ambush Drake for the second time, I guess. So the Cell Sword, along with basically the Con Artist, and I think you console players have the Rebel Mercenary. Those 3 are probably the top of the bunch right now for us clerics, because not only that it has a 10% debuff, they actually stack, whereas the Dancing Shield, for instance, and the other ones don't really stack. So in an ideal world, everyone should have like a Cell Sword, a Con Artist, or a Rebel Mercenary. But DPSers usually go for the Fire Archon, so meh, what can I say? But for us, we go for the Cell Sword, the Con Artist, or the Mercenary. The reason why I prefer the Cell Sword is because of the 3 offensive slots. I'm not a big fan of the Con Artist because If you are using the con artist for those if you're using the con artist for, you know, sudden rings, then I don't recommend that at all. I hate sudden rings for companions because it doesn't give you, you know, sustained stats. I'm one, basically prefer sustained stats. As for the other companions I have here, this is my healers combo. So along with being a great debuffer, I use these two companions on Epic to heal, since this gives 5% outgoing and 4% outgoing combined, which would be 9%. And these two, this is for whenever I crit. The crit severity from these two, which is 15%, it makes my critical heals much stronger. So that's what I usually roll with. Back to this companion now, to my summoned. As you guys see, I have bondings, and I want you guys to understand nowadays, because of the content, bondings are a must. Guys, I know I said augments and whatnot for those who have alts or those who can't afford bondings, but guys, you really have to push as hard as you can nowadays to get bondings. Bondings are a must. Augments are basically obsolete. You must get bondings and you work them as high as you can to at least a perfect level and higher. As for the companions gear, this is what I chose at the end. I went for two Avenger, which will have power crit and arm pen, and I went for one recovery. Basically with this combo, I have basically 50 to 64% crit chance, critical chance percentage, and this helps me as well to, at least when I crit, as I mentioned with these crit severity companions, at least my crit heals will be stronger. Along with this arm pen, I actually have enough arm pen to do damage if I wanted to, and this was just to boost for extra recovery. For the enchantments within the companion, I went at this time, I usually go for, in the defensive slots, either 2 Azures and 1 Dark for lifesteal, or all 3 Azures for a heaping lot of defense. Offensively, I went for Silveries, no question. This helps a lot with having even more recovery. When my bondings proc, I usually have 22 to 24k recovery. And going to the mounts, I'll explain why I actually as well have times where I have 49 to 53k recovery. So we're moving on now. Mounts. Combat power, if you have a legendary mount, none of this matters in my opinion. If you happen to have a Tensors, that's great, but meh, I'm not really a fan of the combat power for us clerics anyway. Equip power, however, basically I'm using the Flailed Snail Legacy one, quick action to gain AP points. If you guys can get any sort of companion that gives the action point gain, like, you know, the Flailed Snail Legacy, a Coastal Flailed Snail, even Bellish Apparatus of Gun, those would be great choices, along with Gorgon. All of those companions give some sort of AP gain back when you use a daily. This doesn't matter. Right. This is what I currently use in my stable. Gladiator's Guile, because I love how this helps me to move faster. This is pretty useful in my opinion. Assassin's Covenant, what I mentioned earlier is if you're using this, then those particular boons I mentioned, you go to those so you help yourself stack more power. It doesn't matter to me personally because I already have a high number of power, but for you guys who are trying to get every oomph of power, you guys should indeed consider this mount ability. Shepherd's Devotion, I actually love this ability a lot. You know, a free buff for your teammates and yourself where when you use a daily, as most of us be able to spam anointed army, for instance, you give your teammates a free buff of defense, deflection and movement. Pretty excellent. Ah, these are the two I wanted to talk about the most. Artificial persuasion and influence. I can't tell you guys enough how great these two abilities are together, and I'm recommending that you guys do your best to try and get these two abilities together, because artificial persuasion gives you an increase to your recovery movement and action point gain and stamina, right? It gets increased by 10% of your power for 15 seconds, whereas influence is the same except for 5% of your power for 15 seconds. So that's a total of 15% added to your recovery movement, action point gain, and stamina from your power. And the great thing about this is it works with your unbuff and buff power. So hence the reason why I've been able to reach ridiculous recovery numbers of 49 to 53k. With my usual 22 to 24k, my break the spirit cooldown is roughly between 5.3 to 5.1. But when it's up to 53k for the most, it's down to just 3 seconds. Alright. The insignias I use within these mount powers. Basically, I went for power and recovery. So take note of this, people. I'm showing you exactly what I use, so pause and take notes as you see power, recovery, recovery here, recovery, power, power, recovery, power, more power here, recovery, 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 power, and power, right? So keep that in mind. I stacked it up with power and recovery. Lastly, I'll go back to my character now. This is what I currently have. You know, the Vivified set from, from FBI and ESPA. Since FBI, you need these to drop, and ESPA gives you a chance to vivify them. As you see, this is the current gear I have together as well with the main and orphan. I farmed for the relic set, as you can see. I went for the rings here. I used brutality and the helig ring, which is a big ring nowadays. And these are the current artifacts I use. The reason why I use the symbol of air now is because when I made the switch from the burning set, I said to myself I wanted more recovery, so I ultimately went with symbol of the air to help this, to help my base recovery, that is. In terms of everything else, guys, the helig ring is quite the excellent ring for us clerics nowadays, especially if you can get 2+5 heligs. You'll be set perfectly and golden if you can get that. So you'll have to farm FBI and ESPA as hard as you can if you're interested in those +5 rings. If you do get +4s, however, you could probably use one. I have multiple heligs +5, but +4, but I usually use one helig and one brutality, just because the brutality possesses 2 offensive slots, and I do gain that burst 4000 power, which ultimately helps me to have more power in terms of my healing aspect. The brutality doesn't share power because it doesn't really add to your it's not base power, it's more like buff power, and that does not share to your comrades, unfortunately. To mention here as well, you can see I currently use in the armor enchant Transcendent Soulforge. Soulforge to me has been the best for PvE, no questions, but if you guys feel you don't need Soulforge, then you obviously use Negation, which I also have as well. Yes, I do. As for your weapon enchantment, I nowadays use Transcendent Dread for multiple reasons. Basically, along with having an excellent debuff, and the fact that this helps me a lot with Bastion of Health, because when I usually slot Bastion of Health, if I crit, the Trance Dread helps that crit to be stronger. So I do have super duper healing abilities thanks to the various stuff I showed you guys with the crit severity pets and the Transcendent Dread. And on another note, the Transcendent Dread matches with my current fashion. But For other options for your enchantment, there are so many. You could use you could use the Frost enchantment, which would be pure or transcendent. You could use the Plague Fire as well, and the transcendent Bronze Wood. All of those are excellent choices, and a Vorpal as well. So as clerics, we do have a lot of choices here. So it's pick your poison. And for the actual slots I have for defense and offense, starting with offense, I personally went with all cruels. As you guys know, I'm a huge fan of cruels because that power and recovery is substantial. So in every offense slot I possess, I went with cruels, as you can see. Every single offense slot. Alright, defensively, I went with cruels as well because I do like that defense and deflect together, and this also helps with that mount power, as I will show again, Assassin's Covenant, as the defense and deflect from the cruel will be taken away and added to get more power in terms of that power share. I did have multiple people tell me, however, that nowadays Black Ice would be actually a better choice, and I did research on it, and it will give me slightly more power. So when I update my guide, I will have to add the Black Ice as another option due to that. I actually possess one Black Ice enchantment, but that was only because I was helping out a friend and they needed to trade some things, and I ultimately helped them with the trade, and I got this Black Ice enchantment in return. Because as you can see in the other slots, I do actually have cruels in my defense slots. And I still have a couple of silveries from my PvP days. Alright guys, I would have loved to go on with the powers, but as I said, it will just make this video way too long. So before I actually end, I would just mention to you guys what I have as the main and orphan abilities. As you can see, manage artifact powers. I currently switch between Astral Seal and Blessing of Battle, so this is your call. As for the orphan, I basically use action point gain as the stat, and I use Holy Fervor. As I should explain to you guys, in my current artifact slots, at least the class features I mean, I use Holy Fervor and Hastening Light. The reason, however, that I use Holy Fervor's class feat instead of Hastening Lights is because Hastening Lights feature still does not work. It hasn't been working since mod 6. Back in the days when it used to work in mod 6, it was badly broken and overpowered. So they eventually fixed it, but not really fixed it. They did stop it from being overpowered, however, they didn't actually fix that orphan ability of it, so that sucks, basically. Alright guys, that will be it. I will be talking, as I said, about my power tree. I should end, however, telling you guys, basically, for all these encounters here, I mainly use Holy Fervor and Hasten Light as my class features. My encounters depends. I basically run with Divine Glow, Break the Spirit, and Chains, but in a tougher dungeon, I'll run with Divine Glow, Bastion, and Astral Shield. However, in a boss fight, I'll most likely, depending on it, switch back from Astral Shield to go with Break the Spirit. As for dailies, basically Hallowground and Anointed Army as your Anointed Champion. And lastly, my at-wills, Blessing of Battle and Astral Seal. Right. Now, this is it guys. Thanks for tuning in, and hopefully I can make another video about the power tree here, as you can see. So stay tuned, and for any questions or comments, just leave below in the comment section. I really appreciate you guys for tuning in, so take care.